Hi, welcome to the Adaptation Station. I'm your host, Kat Averill, and we're beginning with Episode 1, The Modern Mythology.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Now, take a minute to remember your favorite movie from the past year. Maybe it was The Avengers, or Les Miserables, or The Hunger Games, even, maybe. Now, you got it? Good. Now, forget about it, because I don't really care. That was the leading question. And here's another. What do all of those movies have in common? It's like Dora the Explorer. Sí, bueno. That's right, they're all adaptations. Big, blockbusting Hollywood adaptations, the kind that has been the flavor of the week in Hollywood for the past several decades. Or, all the decades. All of the decades that Hollywood has. We as a people love our adaptations. From page to screen to stage to song, and back over and over and over again. We reboot, retread, reset, and otherwise reproduce the same narratives over and over again, now in the modern age more than ever. This complex web of recycled and intertwined stories can create a series of cultural touchstones, story elements that are already familiar to the audience, or they can allow us to respond to ideas in older works by remaking them, reflecting some of our own ideas and experiences. This is because we live in what is called a derivative culture. Derivative culture refers to cultural works, books, movies, music, art, that take elements from, or otherwise use as their source, previously existing cultural works. Although the word derivative has a negative connotation, indicating that the work has less originality and thus less merit, here's a secret. Pretty much all of culture is derivative. True. Narratives are used again and again. The underpinnings of classic plots and themes remain relevant over decades, centuries, the entirety of history. This has been going on since long before the Canterbury Tales curved off the Decameron, and ever since after. Continuously. Once again, all the decades we have, those are in there, yep. So, how then does derivative culture relate to the modern mythology? We choose the narratives we perpetuate, either by making them ourselves or more often inducing others to make them. We induce others to perpetuate narratives by consuming them, buying the book, going to see the movie, etc., etc. If you pay for it, they will make more of it. If you tell someone whose creative work you like that you like it, then they'll probably make other stuff like it, If somebody, like a creative person, has their interest piqued by an existing cultural work, then they'll, make things more like it, in the line, maybe even adapting it. Our modern mythology is made up of the stories we choose to keep telling. Examples include superheroes, westerns, loose cannon cops who don't play by the rules and solve problems with guns, football stories, modern conceptions of romance that are by turns heartwarming and horrifying recreations of outdated heterocentric gender roles, and strangely Carrie. These are the things that we like, and these are the things that we pay for, so these are the things that we keep getting. Which, I'll admit, does come back around and sort of pose the question if we are truly choosing our narratives or just stuck in some sort of weird capitalist feedback loop. Now, it's true that when, say, movies are made by big studios, there are certain executives that are trying to guess what people will pay for, and they might become sort of divorced from what people actually want. Like, for example, the Red Dawn remake.
This is our home.
Nobody needed a Red Dawn remake. Not even the people who were paid to be in the Red Dawn remake needed the Red Dawn remake. But it's my opinion that the truly resonant modern myths rise to the top over time, repeated over and over again in many different mediums and forms by people from all different walks of life. Consider The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, written by L. Frank Baum in 1900 as a children's book, written specifically by Baum as a modernized fairy tale that he believed better suited the turn-of-the-century American child than the somewhat macabre old-world Grimm fairy tales. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz had all the markings of strident American sensibilities. A down-to-earth young farm girl saves herself and incidentally several districts of a foreign country, I guess, from evil, using courage, forthrightness, common sense, and, most importantly, a positive can-do attitude. All in all, it was a raving success, but what really gave the book its lasting power were its adaptations. Or, I suppose you could say, equally as true, what gave its adaptations power was the book itself. The book got its second printing after a deal was made to develop the book into a stage musical. The 1902 musical, despite making some significant plot changes, was well received, and as the years went on, Baum wrote more Oz books, and a few more stage and smaller movie adaptations were made. But what really sealed the film into the national consciousness was the 1939 film adaptation starring Judy Garland. The Wizard of Oz.
I didn't mean to kill her. Really, I didn't. It's just that he was on fire.
Certainly the most fantastic film ever put to Technicolor at the time, and with the crisp tricolor film technique still fairly new, The Wizard of Oz created some of the most indelible images in film history and brought with it a whole new way to imagine Oz. See, every time we adapt a story and adapt it into a new medium, these mediums have, their own strengths and weaknesses, freedoms and constraints. So as we adapt the story to the medium, it can undergo some pretty, radical changes in certain cases. Like, for example, from The Wizard of Oz, some of the most famous images from the film that are famous, worldwide and throughout film history were, just for the film because of its color technique, such as the ruby red slippers, whereas the original slippers in the books were silver, and the witch's iridescent green skin, which was made just for effect in the movie. Originally, the witch was just a wrinkly old lady with an eye patch. Nothing really verdant about it. It's not just aesthetics either. The 1939 film actually made a pretty significant plot change. In order to save time, they condensed two of the characters, the Good Witch of the North and the Good Witch of the South, into merely Glinda, the Good Witch of the North. Originally in the books, the Good Witch of the North was a little old lady named Locasta, although you didn't find out her name until much, much later in the Wizard of Oz mythos. But Glinda was the Good Witch of the South, and Dorothy's, whole journey mostly was to get to the South, to get to Glinda, to tell her how to work the shoes, because Locasta could give her the shoes but didn't know how the shoes worked. So in the movie, it just kind of looks like Glinda's just messing with Dorothy. Just like, oh, go all the way here, do all these things. Oh, by the way, you could have just clicked your heels together the whole time. I knew that, and I didn't tell you. Glinda. Anyway, so it's interesting. It creates a whole new spin on what the story's supposed to be, what Glinda's intentions are. Is she teaching Dorothy a lesson? What's really the lesson here? When it was a little more of just a straight up journey adventure in the book. So it really does make a huge difference. Adapting mediums changes. So we get up that just straight up adapting a work into a different medium, can bring new stuff to the work and can over time keep updating it to bring it to new audiences. But there's another aspect of derivative culture that's really, really cool what we do as people. It's called transformative works. Transformative works take an old narrative and change, some part of the plot or setting or dialogue or something about that, and they create a new work that's, is pretty unique, but is still, very much in dialogue with the old work. One of the most famous modern examples of transformative works is a transformative work based off of The Wizard of Oz, also known as Wicked. Geiger Maguire's Wicked, written in 1995, presented the story of the Wicked Witch of the West, her whole life from birth to death, and her perspective on the dealings of Oz and how she came to be considered wicked. In the novel, we get to follow Elphaba, so named after L. Frank Baum himself, LFB Elphaba, as she makes her way through Oz and, going to university and growing up and facing all these really dark themes of corruption in the government and social unrest and what it means to take action and what it means to be good or evil. Concepts like what is the soul, what is religion. It's a really deep and thoughtful book, by turns serious and infused with a dry, almost catty wit, wicked sense of humor. Yeah, it's really miles away from the whimsical little jaunt that L. Frank Baum cooked up. So even though it seems so vastly different from the world that L. Frank Baum created, it really enters into a deep conversation with this past work, because it's examining a lot of, the foundations upon which it is built, the notion of evil, of pitting the protagonist against the antagonist, and by this it sort of engages with the concept of the fairy tale and morality tales as we know it, through the use of this really, indelible image within our national psyche, the Wizard of Oz. But Maguire isn't the only one. In fact, his transformative work got its own pretty transformative adaptation in the form of the musical Wicked, a book by Winnie Holzman and music and lyrics by Stephen Schwartz. It's one of the biggest hits that Broadway has turned out in recent years, one that catapulted Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth into the national consciousness, the former playing Elphaba and the latter playing Glinda. Now, it is really a different tone from Wicked. It's a lot less stark and a lot more cheerful and focused on the friendships, particularly between Elphaba and Glinda. Several other, important plot changes came about, such as, changing the role of Fiyero to one that's more prominent, especially while they're in school, which, comprises the bulk of the play. And it's a little less cynical, as you would expect from a musical. But it really does have a lot of good things to say, and it's got fantastic music, in my humble opinion. And so, of course, that makes another interesting change between mediums. Might a musical, which is a bit of a bigger gamble than a book, need to be a little more cheerful in its ending and its tone to sell more seats and be more, widely attractive to a bigger audience? Who knows? Maybe we'll discuss that at some point. But, yeah, so because people liked this dialogue that Maguire had between this old common cultural touchstone and the new narrative he created, that narrative was validated by being perpetuated in a slightly different form, but one that kept the core of the story all the same. And the Two Wickeds aren't even, the only one that takes a really different direction with Oz. There's also, the recent Tin Man, several comic books like the Oz Squad, which is a sort of alt history comic book from the 80s. I've seen a Teen Dorothy comic book, a Wild West themed comic book, which is called Yes, Wicked West. Ha, 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 ha. Also about 6 billion books written by other people, supposedly, still within the main Oz book line. People just keep going and going on that. And people are still really in deep conversation with the original text, like, everything from the 1960s Henry Littlefield interpretation of it as a political allegory to, modern conceptions of it as a feminist deconstruction of patriarchal power. Don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain, indeed. People still very much relate to this and want to examine this myth. Yeah, so Oz is really present in our culture. Everybody knows what you mean when you say,
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
No place like home. There's no place like home.
You could quote, any one of those lines, and pretty much anybody in America will know what you mean because it's a part of our national modern mythology. It's a narrative and an iconography that we keep repeating. This is why adaptations can be a really important part of culture. Committing the story to different mediums and keeping it fresh in people's minds and people continuing to go buy into whatever story we're being perpetuated. The things we adapt, the things we reboot, the things we retread, the things we reset and recycle are the things that we value as a culture. And I'm pretty sure we'll keep hearing from the Wizard of Oz myth long into our future, and probably more from Wicked too, seeing as the movie rights to both the musical and the book are still things that are being talked about today. I believe it's Universal who has the rights to a Wicked movie musical, although there was an interesting project pursued by a Disney animator a little while back who proposed a sort of animated Wicked musical. That would be something I would totally pay for to perpetuate. And I believe Selma Hayek wants to produce a TV miniseries about the book. So that should be a thing that we do. That should be something we choose as a culture. Yeah. So once again, I'm Kat Averill. This is the Adaptation Station. Thanks for sitting and watching me talk about The Wizard of Oz for a little while. And have fun really examining Baz Luhrmann's Great Gatsby adaptation in the theater this weekend. Yeah, take a good long look at that. Gatsby? What Gatsby? Baby? What baby?